Now, back to Transport Topics Radio with host Dan Ronan.
Welcome back to Transport Topics Radio here on SiriusXM Channel 146. We are pleased to have joining us on the Newsmaker line Gene Seroka. He is the longtime executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, and he is speaking to us from the port. Gene, good to have you on Transport Topics Radio. Boy, there's been a lot going on. So let's sort of start the conversation by saying, where are things at right now with regards to the port in terms of the amount of container that you're bringing in, and what's been the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on operations?
We're moving about 80 to 85% of cargo that would normally be shipped through the port this time of year. All of our cargo is flowing smoothly. Our rail and truck connectors, our ship work are all happening real well, but we've got room to grow. And as the American economy slowly reopens, we'll have the opportunity to be there as a strong participant.
I read some testimony the other day and watched the testimony of Chris Connor, who, as you know, heads the American Association of Port Authorities. And he painted a pretty difficult picture of where the ports are at right now, saying that if the economy doesn't begin to recover and start to gain some momentum, there could be some layoffs. There might have to be some furloughs. Have you had to do anything like that out in Los Angeles?
Yeah, quite a bit. But as a good friend of mine, Russ Adis, once said, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. So it's pretty difficult to just put a blanket coverage over all the ports in the United States and say this is the way it's going to go. Our port, as an example, has cargo that traverses to each and every one of our 435 congressional districts. It's partly responsible for 1 in 9 jobs in Southern California, which means about 1 million people go to work every day with jobs related to this complex. And about 1 in 52 people in America go to work with respect to the cargo that moves through here. So that's one piece. Having right now what's going to approach 50 million Americans out of work, and yet we're still moving at about 80 to 85% of normal is not bad, although every job loss pains us tremendously. It's food on the table, it's education tuition, it's the hardworking men and women that go to the port every day that don't have a job. Now, with the ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, that group has a collective bargaining agreement that allows them to go back to the hiring hall and find more work in and around this port complex if the individual they have on the job changes because of lower volume. And that's the key, that less cargo means fewer jobs. So whether it's a truck driver, an electrician, a longshore member, all of that is very concerning. For us in the city of Los Angeles, we are a municipal department of the city. We have about 900 people that work with me here at the port, and we are considering furloughs for our harbor department employees as part of a broader City of Los Angeles program. We are right now going to bring our budget to our Board of Harbor Commissioners tomorrow at our traditional fortnightly commission meeting, and that budget has been cut. We have made priorities of regulatory and contractual work that must be done. Everything else is on the table as discretionary. So we're trying to be as responsible as we can, and we don't know what the other side is going to look like. We've been hit with 2 tremendous shocks to the system, the trade policies with China and COVID-19, both of which have had cargo movement go up and down with a lot of uncertainty, where we've piled up warehouses with inventory, and we've also witnessed 14 consecutive months of export declines. So the level of uncertainty is probably as great as I've seen it in some time.
You've been pretty outspoken against the tariffs as well. I recall that last November there was a news conference in Washington, D.C. that I attended, and you've been very, very consistent and have not minced words that you think the tariffs are a bad idea and that they're doing more harm ultimately than good.
That's correct. The outcome has been an increase in imports, a decrease in exports, and a widening of the trade gap. That's the resultant effect of these policies. And at the same time, when it's all said and done, I believe we'll lose about 15% of our imported cargo that'll move via the Suez Canal to East Coast ports that are less regulated and less expensive, and further damaging jobs on the ground here in Southern California and, as I mentioned, through the nation. While it's also impacted the very folks that we were trying to prop up, the American manufacturer, the American farmer. We're giving subsidies out to the farmers. I don't think that is necessarily an outcome that was desired either. And simultaneously, the only one that was paying tariffs was the American company who imports the cargo from China.
You speak about the East Coast, Gene. You're one of your big competitors out Savannah, Georgia. I mean, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade that facility, make it bigger, a bigger rail, bigger truck facility, the like. They're really working very hard to be a very big competitor on the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the ports around the nation, I think, have done a very good job in the container business. New York, New Jersey, the raising of the Bayonne Bridge, the investment Virginia Port Authority has made. Charleston and Savannah both have hired great people, as have the other two aforementioned ports, and spent a lot of money on infrastructure. They've aligned their state governments with their port leadership to develop legislation that will attract cargo. And that's very important as well. But still, we have a lot of work to do around the notion and the question of competitiveness. I've put together a group of West Coast container ports, the employers groups, terminal operators, as well as the Longshore Union, and for the first time, in combination with all that, the two Western railroads to answer the question of competitiveness and what we need to do on the ground, financially, operationally, as well as political regulatory. That group is just in early days, but I think it will be a force to be reckoned with on the landscape of Pacific trade.
You know, you look at your numbers from 2018, and they were phenomenal. Long Beach's numbers, Oakland, Seattle, up north with Seattle and Tacoma. Boy, things were booming. How long do you think it'll be, sir, before we get back to those type of numbers that you were moving? 700,000, 750,000 TEUs per month.
Yeah, you've recalled this very clearly, and the best month we had was in October of 2019 with 2018, excuse me, with 952,000 container units that came through the port and not one whisper of congestion. So we were operating on all cylinders at that point. I think, Dan, it's going to take some time to recover. It really is a consumer-driven economy, as we all know. In the United States, 70% of GDP is driven by what you and I purchase at the stores and online. We've also seen that the West Coast ports have a higher content of China business than do East and Gulf Coast ports. So as this trade flow goes, so will go the volume to these West Coast ports. And now we understand there are continued rumblings in the trade policy realm with respect to China and what may not happen. The phase one trade deal has not yielded the outcomes in early days that were expected by the folks in Washington. So all of these variables make for a very complex equation. And while some think that the economy opening up throughout the nation to the state and local level will be helpful to the port business, it's going to take some time to recover from the depths that we've reached thus far.
And it appears as though because of COVID-19 that this administration has taken a more aggressive stance towards China. The announcement this week that some Chinese air flights into the United States will be postponed, will be suspended. Those things, while tangential, they don't do a lot to help the good feelings, the good relations between the two gigantic economies, do they?
No, they don't. And we need to get along. The two largest economies in the world, as you reference. I lived and worked in China. I lived through a viral epidemic called SARS, so I saw that firsthand. And I can say that the folks we do business with want to get on level footing just as much as we do to make sure the trade flows are appropriate and we can continue to grow our economies.
So what do we do? I mean, what do we do with in these challenging times? If you were running the trade policy, what would be your solution to this?
Reverse the policy immediately.
So go back to where we were.
We need a rules-based trade agreement. There is no such thing as free trade. And when I lived in China, I could walk downstairs from my apartment and buy a late-run Hollywood movie on DVD for $1. Obviously, that can't happen. Intellectual property rights are of great importance. But weaponizing tariffs and using them to get after other political means have proven to be ineffective thus far. I think a revamp of the policy is important to help, especially as our American economy begins to reemerge, albeit slowly, from COVID-19. We're going to have to prop up the American company and their workers as quickly as we can. China, being a large consuming base, should be one of the natural sales leads that we follow. Unfortunately, through this trade policy, we've given sales leads to every other trading nation, and there may not be room for us to play at the heightened levels that we aspire.
Got about a minute left in this segment. Do you think there should be increased trade with other nations in Asia, Vietnam, emerging economies that have really started to show some growth over the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing for us at the Port of Los Angeles is that it becomes a geographical question as well as cost. Is it easier to ship cargo and less expensive from Vietnam westbound via the Suez over the East Coast to get to markets like Chicago, Memphis, and Dallas? Some people are answering that question today, which is why I come back to our level of competitiveness and how we've got to sharpen this approach in the marketplace. Even though these trade policies have hurt us, there is very little we can do with this administration today. So we must adapt. And it's my belief that we have to reinvent the Port of Los Angeles, become more reliant on exports, balance our trade, and hopefully reduce our cost to serve.
Eugene Seroka is our guest. He's the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. You're listening to Transport Topics Radio on SiriusXM Channel 146.
Welcome back to Transport Topics Radio with Dan Ronan.
Back on Transport Topics Radio here on SiriusXM Channel 146, talking with Gene Seroka, the Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, joining us on the Newsmaker line. Sir, where can people find out more information about the Port of Los Angeles if they're looking on social media?
Start off with our website, which is www.portoflosangeles.org. That's .org. And our handles on Twitter and Facebook are at Port of LA, PORTOFLA.
You know, I've been following a lot of the developments in your facility with regards to environmental issues. And of course, here at Transport Topics, we cover so much of the trucking, freight, and logistics industry. Why is it important for your facility, being in Los Angeles, Southern California, with all the air quality concerns that you've got, to be a leader when it comes to environmental issues?
This predated me and is really part of the DNA here in the city and Port of Los Angeles, as well as most of us Californians. We want cleaner air. We want to preserve our waterfront. We want to make sure we have clean water. And the efforts that we've made so far have been world leading. The reduction in source categories like diesel particulate matter, sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide have never been seen anywhere else in a port setting. But we also believe there's much more work to do. In fact, the world's first Clean Air Action Plan, which was adopted in year 2006, either met or achieved its objectives 6 years ahead of time, those objectives that were promised to our community. So we re-upped and created a next generation of Clean Air Action Plan that calls for us to become a zero emissions port by the year 2030 with all those material handling pieces of equipment you see on our terminals, as well as heavy duty trucks being zero emissions by the year 2035. Now, that is a very large responsibility, but we're engaging with the manufacturers, their tiered suppliers, our customers, and the people who utilize this port every day, the importers and exporters, to see exactly how we can design this to get to our goals.
Are we looking at, because of the large size of the California economy, and you've got, your port and Long Beach right next to each other out on the West Coast, are we looking at the electrification of trucks because of that? As California goes, so goes the rest of the nation, that's going to be one of these things that springboards the entire industry in all the other 49 states?
I think that's going to be a difficult proposition, but it is part of the conversation we're having with the truck manufacturers. What can we do? And although we're a large port, we're not their only customer. And we have to understand what well-capitalized, research and development focused manufacturers can do. And that's part of what we're going to try to accomplish with an OEM truck summit later this summer, to lay out what we would like to get done and hear from their experts, their engineers, their scientists, their technicians, how we can get there. And it may not be only electrification. The hydrogen fuel cell electric motor concept is also gaining practical application on the ground right here with folks like Toyota. Others have been very interested in finding out ways that they can get to a ZE platform while making sure that they have production runs that are commensurate with reinvesting in the technology and the employee base that they have. So this is a formula that needs a lot of work, and we're only 10 years away, less than, if you will, from the day we want to become a zero emissions port landside. We've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, I was going to say there is indeed a lot of challenges ahead. What's going to be the biggest one?
I think exactly what I just mentioned. How can we show the manufacturers of this heavy lift equipment, of the heavy duty trucks, that we can be a good customer? And I believe it's a market maker concept, because by ourselves, I don't believe we can do it alone. We've got about 17,000 trucks in Southern California that specifically call on our ports, and that would represent annual production of less than 2 weeks for heavy duty truck producing companies throughout North America. So that's not enough to sway the market. Can we pull other ports and cities together? Can we bring in others who use trucks in regional and longer haul settings, so long as the duty cycle and the round trip strength of the truck is available to us through technology? So I think it's through partnerships and coalitions as to how we can get there faster and accelerate the technology getting on the ground.
Speaking of partnerships, before you arrived at Los Angeles, there were a lot of folks who considered the Long Beach and the Los Angeles ports more rivals than anything. Has that, I presume, has diminished quite a bit? And it seems as though, from everything I've read and reported, that you and the folks at Long Beach work very closely on a number of issues, and there's a very good working relationship between the leadership of the two ports.
Yes, we do. And the history of that dates back about 48 years now to a specific Federal Maritime Commission agreement that allows us to work on certain issues. We've enhanced that over the years, and most recently, both boards of Long Beach and Los Angeles ports have adopted a new memorandum of understanding to address the issues that are most important to our mutual customer base. Just about everybody in the industry sees us as one port complex. It's just usually us city folks that count up the finances and the tickets on either side. But I really respect the leadership of the Harbor Commission, Mario Cordero, the executive director, and his staff for the way that they've worked with us, and I would say vice versa, in trying to mutually bring cargo here to the Southland, because that is what drives the economic value and the jobs creation. But it also will give us more credence to that social license to operate. The work you just asked around environmental strategy and how we can further develop jobs through a workforce training and development center that reaches deep into our middle schools, brings about STEM education, and then gives people choice whether they work on the docks or as administrators, logisticians, or anything in between. And that's where it really gets interesting, when you combine the powers of both the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles.
And that's something also, I would imagine, too, with regards to how you both facilities handle trucking and emissions issues, that there's got to be a lot of cooperation and close work done with the two groups.
Absolutely. We talk on a regular basis, multiple times a week, often. And that also partners up into the discussions we have with the air quality regulators at the state and regional level, how we approach policy issues broadly in the transportation industry, and many more items. So you're exactly right. The cooperation between the two ports, we think, is one of the key attributes to this competitiveness program that we've been putting together.
One thing I did want to ask you concerning the economy and what we're all going through, this recession, as difficult as it may be. There's a lot of plans in the works for expansion. Ports have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, to do some really great things. The Bayonne Bridge, dredging, all these things. Is now the time to continue these expansion plans, even when the economy is contracting and dollars are tight?
We think it is. And because we have had such a sound fiscal policy led by our Chief Financial Officer, Marla Blevins, with the support of our board president, Jamie Lee, we'll be able to invest through cycle. In fact, on the books right now are $367 million worth of continuing construction projects that will employ on an annual basis about 3,000 construction workers. And this work is being done to make sure that we are competitive from an infrastructure standpoint, to bring more cargo more efficiently through our ports, and to re-emphasize and re-emerge our visitor-serving waterfront activities for retail, dining, and entertainment. So doing this now, keeping people on the job at work, and being ready for when our American economy re-emerges are all part of the strategy.
You mentioned the number of jobs at your facility. These jobs are really, in most cases, they're a lot of jobs that are union jobs, well-paying with good benefits. These are jobs that really do build the middle class, don't they?
Yes, they do. And the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and so many others are important to us. And that's why we've put together for the first time our labor collaborative, led by Director of Workforce Training and Development, Labor Relations, Aveen Sharma. We've got 11 key labor unions at the table with us. We meet about once every 6 to 8 weeks and talk about the issues that are important to the port, important to the union's leadership and their workforce. And by combining our strengths, we can plan what the next steps in this port's competitiveness will look like from the ground up.
You know, we could do a whole show on this next question, and we've only got about a minute and a half, so I'll ask it real quickly. What's going to need to be done with our system of education to get more young people into jobs such as the ones that you need so critically, because they pay well? When so much of the emphasis is on four-year colleges, what needs to be done to encourage young people into these type of jobs that pay well?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it does deserve a lot of time. But in short, we live in a harbor community of about 250,000 residents, some in disadvantaged communities with very low educational attainment. And that's why we continue to drive for ideas like STEM education workshops, having people with the awareness of what a large international port right near their homes could do for them and generations to come. But it's about creating interest versus aptitude, seeing where people's interests are, taking that person and trying to get them into a line of education that will demonstrate those talents and really have people rise up. So whether you want to work on the docks or whether you want to pursue college education, we think we're starting to blend both together right here at the Port of Los Angeles. Although I will say it's going to take a whole bunch of people and a lot of effort to get there. But I like the fact that our community interaction is so strong that folks are open to ideas, not just from us, but to share them from their own vantage points. So we'll keep chipping away in this area, but this is going to be a very, very hot topic for us strategically in the coming years.
Gene Seroka, the Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles, joining us on the Newsmaker line on Transport Topics Radio, Channel 146.